Hello, I'm Colette Robbins, and this is Sophie Kahn right there. And we are the co-hosts of File Exchange, a YouTube channel interview series dedicated to elevating the narratives of contemporary artists using 3D software. We started this channel in mid-2021 after Sophie and I observed that there was a void in the discourse about artists using 3D software. As hybrid digital analog sculptors, we also notice a lack of substantive virtual studio visits. As a result, we built this channel to provide a context and space for a literal and conceptual exchange of files. Each episode features a different artist, curator, or writer who has a focus on 3D art. This channel allows you to be a fly on the wall as we share philosophies, tools, and tips revolving around these 21st century tools in art. And today, our guest for episode 10 is Shamus Clisset. And I met Shamus in September, I believe it was, at his solo exhibition at Postmasters, which was incredible. And I was very inspired by the range of scale and depth and detail of texture, and also just interesting use of these very kind of complex tools, these 3D tools. So I'm very excited to kind of jump in with him, but I'm going to pass it over to Sophie, who has known him for a good amount longer than I have.
Yeah, welcome, Shamus. I was trying to remember how we knew each other, and I think it was through NIFA. I think, yeah, that I was a juror, I think, when Shamus had applied, and there was like a really interesting kind of crop of artists using 3D in that year, and I think that was new for the NIFA Digital and Electronic Arts Fellowship. So I was a fan. I gave him like thumbs up on that panel, and I connected with a bunch of artists actually through that time. But yeah, I really excited to see under the hood of some of Shamus's files today. I think his work has a really unique sensibility and a really like a technical mastery paired with a real dark humor, which I appreciate. So yeah, welcome. We're really excited to hear more about your work.
Thank you. Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, Colette. Yeah, I was just thinking about that NIFA, that was the year I think Katie Torn got an award too, and Faith Holland was there. I met all of them through that as well. So it was like a really good connecting.
And Adam Hurwitz too, I think, was on.
It was really cool. Yeah. And then we had that show together. I think that NIFA had curated later, where we were in that, they were like curating, I forget what the theme of that show was, but it was, But
was it a bank or?
I think that was when we actually first met, though, was through that exhibition.
Yeah.
But I owe you some kind of prize money for helping me out. So my show at Postmasters, I'm glad you could make it for that too. That was pretty exciting. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I think my approach is in some ways, very interested in the technology, but it's never meant to just be for technology's sake. I think any work has to transcend that in some way. So I think the dark sense of humor is a way to sort of offset or get away from that. My wife works from home, by the way, so she's always in the background.
We're all home, so.
He's like the Zoom master, if you want to talk about people who are used to working on Zoom.
Nice.
So I've been doing 3D work for, at least in part of my practice for probably almost 20 years. Before that, I was mostly, I actually started out as a painter, and then moved on to digital things like I discovered Photoshop, and that sort of transformed my whole aesthetic of what I was painting. And then I gave up painting entirely because
What year was that when you got into Photoshop?
I first tried out Photoshop as part of my painting practice in like 95 or 96.
Oh, right.
Wow.
So that was like, I don't know what version that was, but I had, it was at college, and they had just gotten Photoshop as part of the film department actually was using it. They had like a whole Avid studio and digital video editing, and they had Photoshop on all the workstations in there. And it was some of my film student friends who first showed me Photoshop, and then I was just like mind blown. And I, after a while, conceptually, it became unimportant for me to actually, I wanted to get away from making physical things.
Yeah.
And Photoshop was the gateway to that for me. It was like, I can just make a picture that's only an image on the screen. It doesn't have any material, it doesn't have any physicality. And that formed a real important sort of conceptual path for me. So then I gave up painting entirely and just started working on screens. And then, yeah, probably early 2000s, I started seeing, really amazing breakthroughs in ray tracing and all the 3D software. Like there were some massive leaps that went on, I think, around that time. And the quality just became incredible. And I was like, that's the next thing for me. So I sort of gave up doing my Photoshop thing and just worked with 3D since then. And along the way, I have worked, like, I think I first started using Pavre. You guys know Pavre?
Oh, yeah, rings a bell. Yeah.
It was one of the really early software that it would render images, but you had no visual interface. It was completely like if you wanted a sphere, you had to type out sphere and then position, X, Y, Z, and then you'd hit render, and it would take like 10 minutes, and then you'd realize your camera was in the wrong place, and you have to start. It's like really slow. And then I got into Blender from there, and ZBrush and all these other things that we'll probably look at in a little bit. And nowadays I'm still working with Blender, because I've been using it. I've used all the different programs, but Blender is the one that I just always come back to because it's so versatile, and it just does everything you want it to in one package. It's not. I don't have to jump around to all these different bits of software anymore, because they've really brought it a long way.
Yeah.
Like I was saying to you earlier, I still use ZBrush somewhat, but Blender's sculpting is actually gotten pretty great. So I tend to just stay in Blender now.
Yeah.
Really seamless.
Yeah. I mean, for what I do, I know it's like pretty much ZBrush is the only piece of software I can kind of do, because I kit bash essentially. And then I sculpt and I Boolean and I do all of this stuff, and it's just really fast in ZBrush. But the sculpting, all of it's getting really good in Blender. So it's like, it's really nice to.
And the rendering engines have gotten so good. I mean, I have actually found myself just working with Eevee now in Blender. Because
that's what I've been using.
It's that instant gratification with, I used to, when I first started rendering with, Pavre, but then I was using Indigo, which is a physically based ray tracer it's very, very, very realistic, but also takes forever. I mean, it's gotten faster now, but my first Indigo render, actually the first prints that I made really big, I knew that I wanted this scale to them that was gonna be like a painting. And so I did the math on it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to render this at like whatever, 14,000 pixels high by 9,000 pixels wide, some mega file.
And then that's like a week that your computer's tied up.
It was months. It was like almost like an entire month for the first one that I completed in that workflow was like
drive,
for a month. And I just hit render and I left my computer for almost an entire month and then came back and so those were the days. Yeah. I don't have the patience for that anymore. I need the instant gratification.
I think we adapt with the software. I mean, I jumped into the software in 2015. So I came in super late to the party to 3D software. And I was like, ooh, it's now like so advanced and it's gotten so much more accessible for people who didn't come from that background. I think it was actually the perfect time for me to have gotten into it because I also was a painter. That's what I studied. I did two-dimensional work until 2015.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it was my path was a winding one, but it's interesting to meet another person that started off as a painter and Photoshop was also my gateway drug.
Right. That's how I describe it to my students too all the time. It's like this is your gateway drug into the much larger world of all these other apps. And everything
starts and ends in Photoshop. So it's like pretty much like
it is like the bookends.
It is. It's totally.
What was your painting like? Do you feel is your content different now, or is it like were you?
No, what's so funny is that if you like the sculptures that you see in the back, I'm using some of the same materials I used. I did large scale graphite paintings. So I did these like detailed graphite paintings of monoliths and like heads, and they were like paintings of sculptures, and it seems so silly that I wasn't making sculptures, but it wasn't until I discovered that I could, you know, use a two-dimensional screen to make something three-dimensional that it didn't make sense to me until I could use my painting sensibility to sculpt. So, and then that was it. That was like, I could never look back. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much I want to do with this. And all of these ideas that have been in my head that I've been milling over for all these years, and I've been doing these paintings of them, I can actually make them and push them. So that's how I got into it. But yeah, so I when I look at your work, I think about really like impasto paint and yeah. Oh, can we see an image? Can we?
Oh yeah, of course.
Sorry, we get
Let me just put my website for this one. We were talking about.
sure, yeah, because there's a lot. Oh, I love the adjunct professor. Oh, that's so beautiful. I mean, this to me reminds me of like, you know, Matthias Fleischer, the Leipzig School of Painters. This has that spatial sensibility where they have like hardcore perspective and patterns and everything's, you know, almost like,
I mean, even though, yeah, it's interesting you're talking about like doing sculpture on a 2D surface, because I took me a while to actually embrace that sculpture aspect of it, because it obviously is sculpture, but my sensibility, I was really so ingrained from that painting aesthetic that I always thought of my pictures as this final composition. Like I almost stayed away from doing too much of this, like showing that it was 3D, because I was really just interested in that final image. Even though you can,
but I feel always a photographer, you know, and it was, I talked about this, the series that I did that was 3D scans of toe dancers, and the woman that I scanned, Azumi, for a lot of the pieces. It was amazing because she is used to performing in the round, and so her thing was like, she said, I try to make this pose look as interesting as possible from every angle, because the viewer might be behind me, or, you know, her audience is going to be like this in a circle, but my mind is always framing. No matter what, I'm in Maya, but it's all about the frame and the camera frame and the viewport little preview, you know, and it's always like the one angle, the flat image. And it took me, I'm still there, you know, like the sculptures, I feel like they have an angle, like that's the good side, you know.
No, and I mean, I do it less so now, but I would say when I was first getting into it, that I would just obsess over all those little compositional things of framing it, and I would go in and have things completely in the wrong scale or in the wrong, not physically where they should be, because of where I wanted them placed in the space. And that actually that brought you to some interesting places too. It kind of freed me up from, you know, because if you were thinking of it as a sculpture and you were just going to make everything fit the way it actually had to in the real world, you'd be limited by certain things. And 3D actually lets you break out of that and get into some weird territory where, you know, the other picture that the one that I'll show you, the one that sort of started the whole thing for me, which was the Grizzly Bear, which you know, if you when I conceptualized this, the image sort of came to me as a finished image in this case, and I sketched it, like I just drew it out, like I do sketches in Photoshop or in an actual sketchbook. So and this came out exactly the way that it came out, basically. But in the process of it, you know, you realize that, you know, the concept of this is like some kind of, you know, to me, this character was like this kind of supernatural golem being inhabit, you know, in this digital space, and he was able to do all these supernatural things and have all these powers that you wouldn't have in the real world, right? And so the idea of him inhabiting this bear, not just having on a bear skin, but like actually taking over the entire body of the bear, And then where I wanted the hands to be obviously has no relationship to the anatomy.
Yeah.
I wanted the scale to be like the bear is huge, and of course the face can fit inside the mouth, but then that makes this anatomy totally bizarre and weird, but it's just how it had to be. And so that, you're able to make those kind of decisions in this 3D process that would have been very different, I think, if I was approaching it from a literal physical sculpture standpoint.
Yeah, definitely.
And by the way, the back side of this, this is the one that took like 3 or 4 weeks to render the first time. And I was struggling so hard to optimize it because it kept crashing, trying to render at the full res. So if you were to flip this around and see the backside, it's all completely hollow. I deleted everything that's not necessary on the back.
Yeah,
so,
that's funny.
And you would never know it because I never wanted you to turn it around. You're only supposed to see it from this side. So there you go. You're conceptualizing it as this composition, and then I was able to just remove everything that was not necessary. So he doesn't have a back. He doesn't have it's like nothing back there.
Well, that's the story with the Final Fantasy movies, that the character's hair was 40% of the render time on those.
Oh wow.
That's what I heard. I mean, the older ones.
Yeah.
That hair simulation. Yeah.
And this isn't even like a hair simulation. This is just a particle simulation with a single model of a hair that I made, and then it's scattered, 500,000 times over the surface of the of the suit. And this was a ZBrush, and this is actually a funny ZBrush story too, because this is when I had first really gotten into ZBrush, and I had started to sculpt the bear in a much more realistic. I was looking at all these and bear anatomy reference, and all this stuff, making it really correct. And then ZBrush in the middle of one of my sessions totally fritzed out on me and crashed.
Yes, it
did. And when I recovered the model, it looked like this, all shriveled up and shrunken and bunched up.
Yeah.
And it became like the solution to this image,
Yeah.
So it's like working with those glitchy instabilities actually gave me a lot of inspiration back then too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really strong. That time frame, I mean, that was really hard to do that. That was like, and did you do the trees like later? Did you bring that in Photoshop, or did you?
No, that's all modeled. The whole thing, my whole concept, once I went to 3D, was like, I'm not compositing anything anymore. Like no Photoshop, nothing. This is all a real space, a real virtual three-dimensional space
that you're making these paintings of, essentially.
That I'm making, making a painting, or I kept when I first was doing, I kept talking about it being like, okay, this is an actual alternate dimension or another world, and you're able to go in there and photograph it and bring those pictures back out.
Yes.
And then within that, it was like the narrative aspects of it sort of started to branch out from there, like, because then you have this new frontier, so there's a lot of frontier imagery. There's a lot of things coming out of that, like you're discovering a new world through this process. And working with this character as the quote unquote golem, I actually made it look kind of like clay, like, to tie into this mythology of the man built out of clay and brought to life. And then within that, it started to take on a sort of life of its own, so that this character, then I was the creator and he was the destroyer in a way, like, because there's a key to that mythology that it always goes haywire, right? That it's good intentions to bring this golem to life and want him to do good things, but it always backfires. And there's, it's like, Frankenstein is one of the classic ones that ties into that. And there's all kinds of other examples of, like,
we talk about that a lot, like the Dr. Frankenstein's monster, like that, so many of us, when you're playing with digital tools, you're playing with so many components that you're kind of piecing things together and adding different, like, either like simulations of some sort that, that create our own monsters. And what happens when we do that, and like, what are the kind of the implications, or like, what does that mean, and what kind of, very interesting.
And there's a lot of writing in photography history, because my background was like photography and art history before moving over to 3D, talking about the photographic image as a zombie or a corpse. You know, there's this idea of like, no matter what, there is this weirdness in duplicating the human body and creating a, you know, a doppelganger, like a digital doppelganger. And so it's always going to be this creepy, haunted kind of dead thing, no matter what, like no matter how much life you try to imbue into it.
Right.
And I really like that, you know, there's like thinking of, and some of this writing is old, you know, it's from like the 30s and 40s, but, and then there's the kind of Dorian Gray thing too, where the photograph stays endlessly youthful as our bodies like become more and more decrepit. And
Right.
yeah, I think there's some good territory to be mined in there for sure.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and for me, it was like being able to put a, you know, like I was saying, a character that, you know, a lot of people assume that that the fake Shamus is me, because I use this fake Shamus all over the place.
yeah.
But it was always a separate character. You bring up the Frankenstein's monster, and I kind of like, now I sort of go back and forth, like I refer to myself as fake Shamus, but in the way that people refer to Dr. Frankenstein as Frankenstein's monster. They talk about Frankenstein's monster and they just call him Frankenstein. And it's like, no, you know, you get that sort of pedantic thing like, oh no, but that's Frankenstein's monster. And I like that kind of blurring of the story too. So like started out that this was like he was a separate sort of creation of being,
like an alter ego.
It had its own, but not an alter ego. It wasn't supposed to be me. It was always supposed to be something that I was projecting out there.
Right.
And it was separate from me. Although I did model the face on myself. Like there are tons of things that I incorporated from myself in it, but it was always intended as more of like this weird, you know, the power trip of like the creator and the creation, and then the sort of rebellion from that. So a lot of the content early on was about super like violent imagery and stuff that like this creature, when let loose, like was like a destructor or some kind of a you know, destructive force. Well, you know, like I'm building this world and he's destroying it, kind of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's also an interesting strategy to like kind of survive the art world too. You know, if you have a performative like self that's out there, and then you have a distance from your own kind of ego, or your own, you know, like vulnerabilities. If you're putting something else out into the art world, then it gives you maybe a little space. I don't know.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I also feel like that the whole Avatar thing had been done by a lot of other people, I think, around that time too. You know, you had people who were like, I mean, there's tons of examples, but La Turbo, obviously, doing like a fully, you know, being a fully virtual persona and things like that. And I didn't really want to do that. I didn't have that, you know, I'm always sort of aware of of not wanting to repeat, you know, somebody else's.
Do what other people are doing.
So this was a way, it was a way to distance.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting to hear that, because I didn't quite know which you preferred, like if that was a name you preferred, or if it was, it makes so much sense now that it was something to kind of be projecting outside of yourself.
I'm using the fake Shamus like more and more in sort of social media. I mean, it's obviously like been part of my social media stuff forever, but I like that it just sort of blurs now. Like people, different shows. Sometimes I'm in a group show and they refer to me as fake Shamus and they don't even ask me. You know, and then other people they use my my real name and whatever, and it's all fine to me. Like maybe it's bad for my branding, I don't know, to be all confusing.
I actually think it's a really smart thing that you did early on, for the reason Sophie mentioned. That's such a great point, Sophie, is like it's so hard in the art world to sometimes distinguish yourself in your own life from your life as an artist, a professional artist, like going out in the art world, networking, all of these things we have to do if you want to show and exhibit and be a part of the dialogue. But also it talks conceptually about our world of multi-identities right now, our digital identities, which are literally fake versions of ourselves. Like they're not fake in the sense that there isn't a reality to them. They actually become something, which I think your work does too. So it's like, but like that idea that we have a Twitter presence, a Instagram presence, our website presence, and email presence, or now Zoom professor presence or Zoom interview presence. It's like all of these like other, alternate kind of versions of ourselves are out there. So I think it's really timely too, that you kind of got in there and realized that early as you were getting into these tools, that that's going to happen. And because now
Well, and I
all
don't
of us
know,
have
it
that.
actually sort of, it happened, and to go off on another,
Yeah.
backstory tangent, the name, that Fakeshamus name first came to me even before I had fully started working in 3D. But I was working digitally, and I was definitely interested in this sort of not imaginary, but like this duality of like the real world versus that space in the computer, and creating, this alternate thing. And I happened across an article that was, forget where I read it exactly, I should be able to remember, but there was a study done with children and their imaginary friends. And this article that I read was just like a questionnaire, like, what's your imaginary friend's name? Can you describe them? And blah, blah, blah. And all these kids who were like, 4 or 5 years old had imaginary friends, and they had the most elaborate stories and amazing details and so intricate. Like, my imaginary friend is so-and-so, and they live in the back right corner of my mind, and they wear green plaid pants, and they have orange hair, and they can go on and on and on. And it's very real, but it's an imaginary friend, and they recognize that it's an imaginary friend. They know it, and they acknowledge it. And the best one was this one girl had an imaginary friend named Fake Rachel. And and had all this other stuff that went along with it, but that somehow just rang this bell for me. Like, it's just so incredible to be able to hold that very real identity, that this character, this person who's your friend, in this very real way, but also acknowledge that they're fake and name them Fake Rachel.
That is such an amazing story. That is like,
so I grabbed that for myself in this realm of digital stuff, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be my own imaginary friend or whatever, in the context of that. And so that led to all this other stuff later. Once I started going really full bore with the 3D stuff, then it just fit so perfectly. It was like this elegant solution to the whole conceptual part of it. So
that is such a, I mean, I think about this all the time, just like capturing that complete kind of, with children that young, that they have zero inhibitions about the idea of an imaginary friend, or talking about people in their brains. Like, that's not scary to them. That's just like what it is. And as artists, we live in these worlds that we're trying to get out somehow and communicate with the rest of the world somehow. And it does sometimes feel like I feel like when I did my first AR piece and I projected it in the Met, I just like had it on my app and recorded it in the Met, but see, in my brain, I'm like, I projected it, and like I was looking at my sculpture in the Met, and I felt like I had an imaginary friend. And because I was like recording something that was not there for the rest of the people walking by, and they were just looking at me.
I've done that. I did that in Prospect Park, and people were like, what is she filming? And they're looking at it as nothing there.
But it does feel like that in some ways, like that you have these like imaginary worlds and friends that then, you're trying to kind of bring into the world for people to see and explain explaining them is fun. That's great.
Well, and the interesting thing about kids, I think, is they haven't made that total separation between the imaginary. It's all kind of one reality. It's, the real things and the fake things all kind of blend together. And then you get older, and then you're like, oh no, that's not real. And you put that away. And then that separation becomes really clear. But at that age, like, it's
except
all
in politics.
Yeah, right.
Let's not go there.
No, I'm not asking you to talk about but you know what I'm saying.
I was actually thinking about what, to talk about, and the themes of, even my show at Postmasters this year. It's very tempting to go into how that all relates to, the past, at least past 4 years or 5 years, and then I'm like, yeah, you don't want to talk about that guy.
Oh no, you don't. It's like Voldemort. Like
yeah, I know.
Yeah,
In our house too. I'm like, no, just don't mention it.
no, but it's more. It is interesting though that as adults, like we also we don't always know how to discern fact from fiction, and we don't
Right.
always know what's fake and what's real. And now with social media, when we do have all these different identities, it's becoming more and more difficult as information circulates at such a amount, per second that we're kind of gathering, that we just
Yeah.
it's just different. I mean, it's a different type of challenge than a child knowing the difference between an imaginary friend and a real friend. But it's still, there's something I think connected to that in our
Mm-hmm.
physiological.
All these different realities sort of,
yeah.
they all sort of lose part of their realness in a way. Like when nothing can be totally trusted anymore, then it delegitimizes everything in some way.
Everything.
Yeah.
And that's,
like behind the scenes of reality.
Oh yeah, we want to see your files.
Oh yeah, behind the scenes. So let's come back to, because I got this guy up. So here's the final product. That's my adjunct professor.
Adjunct.
Yeah. And I actually made this one when I had first started teaching. I'm not actually an adjunct professor. It's a little bit different at Sarah Lawrence. They do like, they call us part-time faculty. So, but this was my joke about sort of feeling, I don't know, all of these more recent ones have a sense of sort of exploring my own, I wouldn't say insecurities, because I'm not insecure or anything like that. But there are, if you're 100% secure all the time, it's not true either. It's not.
I was just about to say, wow, lucky you.
So
what's your secret?
Ways, like what I think I do is I embrace like all of those things, all of those potential failings, and I just explore them, and I try to be really honest about it and put it into some form that, I don't know, that's it's not necessarily pretty. I've often described the head on this guy as opposed to the one that was just in the Grizzly. This is like a body dysmorphia sort of self-portrait. It's like as you get older and you age and things change and whatever, and so there's a bit of that grotesque and whatever, but anyway, there's the final product, and let's go. Here's my ZBrush sculpt of it.
Yeah.
You can see, and this is a couple pieces because the head was a totally separate.
Okay.
How many points
and there you
are
can
on
see
this?
how crazy.
Oh.
Sculpted, like, and this was actually a hair. This was a, what do they call it? The mesh, the fiber mesh.
Fiber, right? Yeah.
For the hair.
I haven't used that one.
And this is, let's see, how many does it say? Usually
it's on the far right. You got to like close that like right side in order to, you got to double,
or put it away or something. Pop it
Yeah,
out.
you got to double.
I haven't used this in so long. Oh my gosh.
No, you got to double click the little gate. Yeah, there you go.
All
right.
Oh,
yeah. Wow. Okay.
There you go.
And you were able to map that?
A couple million.
Wow.
And that's let's see, that's the, where's my, because that's the head, and then there's.
Oh, that's just the head.
I think that's
well,
just
the head. Now you gotta like pull the tool palette back down because it's it's like.
And the tool, so there's the head and there's the body, which is probably. Okay, so this one's okay. So total is about 3 million, and the body is about 800,000 of that.
Love it.
So that makes sense. But...
Can I see your poly frame? Can you click that on?
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh wow. Did you polygroup that? Oh no, it looks like
no, it's just random. I was not being technical with this at all. I built it in Blender as a rough shape, and then brought it into ZBrush.
Oh, that's smart.
And then just sort of, my process in ZBrush, like I was saying at the beginning, I was really into being able to create things more realistic, and then I really got abstract with it for a while. And this is sort of the tail end of that, where it was all about just messing things up and seeing, you know, where it would go. And I think the head is actually, it might actually be based on the same head that was in the Grizzly and that one from 2010, and then just totally decimated, you know, destroyed, and then with the hair.
I love that head.
I've got the other, where's the other one? Hold on. Because I use this as I did a close-up of it too. Let's see if I can find it.
I'm always impressed in these interviews with the speed at which artists can find their files on their hard drive.
Yes, no, that's something too that's like
common.
Do you feel like you're great at your file organization?
No.
I'm mediocre, I would say, at best.
I feel it comes and goes, actually. I feel like sometimes I feel like I hit a really good streak and I'm like able to find everything, you know, immediately. But not really.
I know.
So here's you know, a version of this where I just did the head.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
As a bust, kind of. And this has been processed a little bit farther because you see it's not the hairs anymore. I think I did a remesh or what do they call it? Dynamesh.
Dynamesh, yeah.
Which was kind of interesting with the fiber mesh with the hair, because then it turns into something other than hair. It sort of turns into this weird foamy, you know, weird cheese or something. You know, it's like what is that texture?
Like,
you know,
I don't know, like not spray foam exactly, but some kind of weird substance.
You know?
Yeah,
I love the way it looks like. It's also
so
kind of spongy.
Yeah, it's like merging a lot of the hairs together, but you still get some of these wispy things coming off. So I was working with that for a bit. And then of course, you know, I had to throw a bunch of like blood all over it. But
I love that. I love that you have a little bit of, you know, horror in there.
I'm a big horror movie fan, and it definitely, I think there's an aesthetic to good, you know, gory movie effects that I'm always drawn to.
Like the original,
not everyone's
Night of the Living Dead or whatever.
Or like the ones that get like really creative with it. I mean, even like, I don't know, even like one of my favorite movies is probably The Shining, right? And we've got like Stanley Kubrick with in the elevator that just dumps, you know, how many thousands of gallons of blood out on the floor. You know, there's just like this crazy aesthetic to that kind of thing that I feel like I'm thinking of sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, and then of course here you can see I replaced the feet on this guy. So the feet were sculpted, but I did a better foot sculpt.
Yeah.
I love it. This is so much fun to see this and see kind of how you work. Nice.
And then so here's the Blender version of it. I was telling you, I ended up using this as like a proxy.
Yeah.
And basically linked in the high-res OBJ sculpt from ZBrush, and that's what you see in the end there. But but this is how I sort of mapped it out in ZBrush. You can see I've got all the separate little elements that line up with it, of course.
Like blocking out a painting.
Yeah. You can see a bit of my rig for the hand. This is a hand model that I've used a whole bunch that I sculpted.
Yeah.
And then it's got, you're able to rig it in different ways. So this is the same one there.
Yeah, I love the column in this one, and then the texture used on the column.
I love them. I love mixing these different forms. That's definitely something that I'm aware of a lot of the time. Is like when you're looking at like the final product here and how this gets really loose and gritty and abstract, and then putting something that's just so concrete and like just the object, like no messing around. I just made a perfect column model, and there's a pleasure that I get from that that's the same as I get when I'm doing these abstract sculpting, and it's like those things can all kind of reside in the space together in the same way. They're all 3D models. And so I, you know, when I'm in the mood to just make, you know, like the like the solo cups here, these party cups. I enjoy doing that, and it gives me different options for, if you're not feeling inspired that day to make the dynamic, amazing sculpture, abstracted and
Yeah.
super new and fresh,
Like
you can
the
always
revolve.
just sit down and make some object, and I get the same kind of pleasure from it. It's like, it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
It's all kind of the same.
Well, it's like accomplishing a small goal versus like the idea of like making a whole body of work, like working on a cup or like one texture. Like it is very satisfying. Or like, exploring.
You're like adding to your library of assets.
You're adding to your content, your asset library, and like, and your repertoire. I know your cast of characters. Yeah, like, because that's what I feel like. I'm slowly building a cast of characters that I can then put in like, I'm very new to kind of moving over into like allowing my work to exist on the screen. This is like a new thing for me because, once I transitioned from painting and drawing, and same with Sophie, it's like from painting and drawing for me into sculpting, I was like, when I look at the screen, I'm like, I want this to be physical. I want to feel this. I want to sculpt this. I want to play with this in 3 dimensions. And then Sophie really inspired me to explore, beyond that for the show that we did at spring break, and just to kind of jump into the NFT world and see what that medium was like for my work. And I did my first video or my first animation with my sculptures. And then now I've done like an AR piece, and then I'm also thinking about if I do renders as well. And then I bought an XY plotter because I want to bring drawing back into my practice, but in a different way, because like, to me, just making a drawing the way I did before is not interesting to me. What's interesting is what happens when I'm collaborating with something. And so, but I'm really inspired by what you're doing with your renders and the way you're thinking about them, and with like and you do have an art historical context with your work too. I mean, there's definitely like, I'm seeing like all of these layers of history just by the different objects you're choosing and the way you're putting the composition together.
I studied way too much art history. Like I had to unlearn a lot.
I know.
Art history,
I'm still unlearning art school. I'm still unlearning art school.
But there's still great. I mean, it doesn't mean that you give it up entirely. I think it's just more like you find different things, like the pipes. I don't know if you recognize this, but there's a Magritte painting that's like sort of small painting. Yeah, but it's like this small one, and I came across it randomly. I don't think I ever saw it in a show, but I found it online somewhere, and it's like a little painting of like a very sort of rough. It isn't like the polished version of his paintings that you usually see that are like really finely rendered. It's like very rough, but it's then got all these pipes sticking out all over the face, and I straight up ripped that off for this. So I'll just like steal something, but in taking it into this other context, it's like tribute.
No, but I think that's so much about what we all do. We all are absorbing things, then reiterating them, and
filtering it through, it turns into something else.
Filtering and processing, I think, is like, I think you're totally right. It's like there's like, I mean, I went the traditional art school route, and there's certain things that you learn in art school that I hear people saying, and I just get agita because I'm like, oh, those art school tropes. But it's at the same time, there's like a really great spot for that in, my own history. That's just what my history is. And, I think we all just have to figure out which things we want to use and which things we want to lose. Like, as we get, we go through our own journeys.
Well, I think it's also a struggle. Like, I think when I was doing painting, like I had a sort of, I could really assimilate things like really well. I had a harder time coming up with something that was my own, I think, for a long time. So I think that's kind of what I feel like I had some real major art history heroes when I was in art school. And if you look at my, thesis that I did, it's like, it's kind of like a total ripoff, you know, like all my influences are right there on my sleeve, kind of a thing. And it took a long time for me to get away from that. I guess that's what I mean when I had to sort of unlearn it. You had to sort of just give up on all those things, or maybe work through them all and then come out the other side.
I think work through, because like honestly, I think it's really hard to decide kind of who you want to be as an artist, because it's completely up to you. There's no template, and it's like there are like hierarchies and different like trends and different things in the art world that definitely influence everybody. You can't like get away from it.
Right.
But to kind of figure out what you want to do in the midst of all the education you get and like all the influences you have, and like what language you want to use and which tools you want to use, there are so many components to it. And I don't think everybody comes up with it or gets that figured out right out of school. Like
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think there's any time
everyone's
frame.
got their own pace for it and everything. Exactly.
Yeah, some people really like get it like locked down, like in school, and they get it and they know what they want to say and they have their vision and they are confident about it. And then others, I feel like it takes so much longer, just different. And it's like, that's why it's a very hard world to exist in, because people that figure it out early
changes, you know.
Yeah,
like
that's true
have
too.
That vision, but not be able to realize the work that they wanted to make. I mean, like I felt like I had the experience where I've been using 3D scanning since 03, you know, since I was like 22 years old, but I couldn't 3D print. Like I now have this like nice little DIY setup, but it's mostly is, you know, that this stuff is cheap and accessible now. And I'm lucky enough to be married to an engineer who like really enjoys tinkering with these things. I didn't have that mindset when I was, you know, like just out of school, and 3D printing was so expensive. And so, you know, I think that this really common too with new media artists to have ideas and visions for their work, and take, like, the market's got to catch up, you know, computer power has to catch up. So it's interesting. I feel like I'm seeing a lot of digital artists that I've been following for a long time kind of doing some really strong work recently, or just even the past few years, like people who I've sort of always known what they wanted to do, but to see it more fully accomplished has been really interesting. And kind of, I guess, speaking of like the current digital art world too, since we're coming up for an hour, I'm curious to hear how you position your work within the kind of NFT space, and how you see, you know, these changing, or how you've felt that I don't know, how you've seen that influence your practice, I guess. I'm curious.
I think, you know, it's interesting, Colette, you're saying how you didn't envision your work on a screen, and I never did either. Like when I'm working in Blender or in ZBrush or something like that, the screen almost kind of fades away, and you're just like, when you're really in it, like you're just in it, and it feels like you're really just in the space and putting things together. Like I'm not aware of the screen. And like I said earlier, I'm not really thinking of this in terms of like this format. Like I always have the scale in mind when I'm working on a composition. I was thinking of it, and my thing was always big prints. Like I can make a big print of this and have it take up a big part of the wall, and it feels like, again, like a painting or something like that.
Imagine existing in a, like coming to it in a gallery, right? You know?
Okay, so it's similar. You also had the thing where you needed to get that.
I always wanted that.
Yeah.
Like even if it's just a print that's hung on the wall or something, you're having a physical interaction with it.
Oh yeah, there's a physicality to the material.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd say like the thing that has changed for me is like to with the NFT stuff is that it's so screen based. I think you're if you want to be part of it, which, you know, there's debate about that too. But I'm like, I'm going along with it and seeing what might happen, and it does make you start to want to create something that is for that format. So I have been thinking like newer works are more in line with like something that has to do something interesting on the screen, because if it's just a static JPEG on a phone or on a iPad or something like that, that doesn't really do it for me still. So now I guess I'm doing more, and I'm getting more into animation. And as you guys saw in my show, I'm working with Unreal Engine more to do like simulation pieces that are more like generative, where you know, the video is playing, but I also don't want to just have the narrative video happen. I like the possibility to randomize things and have it
Mm.
unpredictable and sort of unplanned.
An image
Definitely.
of one of those pieces you can
Yeah, can you show us?
Yeah, let's see if I can.
Because I think that's, I mean, that's how both Sophie and I have been talking about approaching it. Like when, you know, we've been working on different projects, is like using it as a medium instead of just like, I mean, there's so much hype around NFTs. There's, you know, there's so much saturation now. And I think, you know, artists who want to start like dipping their toes into it, that's what I always say to them. It's like, what would this mean in your practice? Like, how would this relate to it? And what do you want to say in this medium? Otherwise, you know, that's fine if you just want to make money. I mean, that's completely fine. People need money, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's no different than selling a print in some capacities, depending on which blockchain you're using. But
yeah, and it's sort of unclear what that you know, what the NFT format is really doing for art yet conceptually. It's
no,
sort of
yeah,
like,
it's
just a
very
market
interesting.
thing.
Mm,
Let me see if this will play. It might be kind of glitchy on the Zoom
no
playback. But here's my one that I call Brick, which is just this endless missed basketball shots.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I've
Are you a
been
sports
working.
person?
I was, you know, I'm not anymore. But growing up, I was a huge basketball fan, and I played a lot of basketball. And there was, you know, in line with a lot of the themes of my work, that there's a sort of, especially a lot of the pictures that I've been working on lately have to do with that sort of the dominant gesture of the slam dunk, right? That's just such an aggressive, like, you're in your face and you slam dunk it, and like the guy who was defending you is like humiliated or whatever, you know. And I like that. I like to play with those kind of things and how absurd they are. So like this piece is sort of like a companion to those slam dunk pieces, and that it's like an endless, you know, before the game, everyone warms up, and in the NBA, everyone's so good, you just see like the balls going in for, you know, one after the other. It's like swish, 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 right? So this was my take on, you know, flipping that around and showing again sort of the failure of it, or the sort of falsehood of
like the frustration as well, like
frustration. Yeah.
And it's also like the net looks almost flaccid.
Yeah. Totally does. Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's like I heard something the other day. It was just a discussion on Twitter talking about like techno optimism versus kind of techno dystopianism, you know, and like the promise of technology versus what it delivers and what it brings in our lives. And I think that I feel like it's been a common thread in actually almost all of the artists that we've talked to, that they're real, I would say they fall very heavily on the dystopian side.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Well, and that's another thing that from the very early days, like that frontier imagery and I never focused on like, hey, it's so great that we're discovering this new world. I focused immediately on the destruction of the landscape and all these terrible things that it brings, you know. I called the Fakeshamus at the beginning. I had a sort of subtitle for the character that I called the Manifest Destinaut. And it was about like this idea of manifest destiny, and he's an explorer and he's conquering, and in this with this negative connotation of the manifest destiny. They're just so outdated and such a broken part of our history, you know, but it is how we got here today as well. So there's like all these levels of how it all fits together. And
there's so much nuance. Are you referring, Sophie, are you referring to Dr. Tina Knoll? I think that's her article
on Twitter. I think that was her. Yes. I think I read it at like 3 a.m. when I was in like insomnia land, so it didn't lodge in fully. Yes,
it's such a good article. I'll send that to you too, Shamus, and I'll put it in the comments, because it's like the first article that I think talks about NFTs in an interesting way. Because either you get this like art world discussion about it where it's like, oh, it's just all money and commerce, or you get this like NFT like kind of evangelist perspective where it's like
Yep.
everything is perfect. This is changing the world and making everything better. And like,
and you better not question anything.
and you
like,
better
don't say
not
anything
question it,
negative.
or or you're not being like, you know,
But I think
this or
what I do
that.
think is interesting within the NFT thing is I think there's a lot of room to go counter to that and to critique it from the inside. And that's sort of, you know,
That's interesting.
a part of what I've been like. I've got this piece with on the Postmaster's site here. This was the first thing I did when I was first introduced to the whole concept of the NFTs. Was I had this model of the canary in the coal mine, and I had made this, like, again, this was from 10 years ago or so. And it just immediately became this connection to me, like crypto mining, the mine, the canary being like this early warning system for like bad things going to happen.
What a beautiful metaphor to put into that medium. That's so smart.
But I'm not, you know, I'm not participating either. I mean, this is the whole thing, like
that's the conundrum of being an artist, isn't it, though?
I think my approach is always going to be that duality of like, look, I can self-critique, I can critique it, but I can be part of it, and I can self-critique as part of it. And you know, and it's all about just sort of facing it head on and being straight up about it. You know, I'm not gonna be like the vocal anti-NFT when, like, yeah, it would be great to make some money off NFTs, that, you know, now that there's a market for it. And
and also NFT conceptually has so many, there are options and opportunities for that mindset or that kind of template to be applied in different unique ways. Whether it will or won't, I don't know.
Right.
But like the blockchain's not going anywhere. Ooh, look at all your files.
Oh yeah, I love seeing files. So we're almost
I know. And then we'll look at this file and then we'll
I want to see this one too.
Yeah. This one's kind of dense because it's got a lot of stuff happening, but this is more like my current workflow, which is, like I said, all EV.
Oh, nice.
Oh, this is great.
Which is so fun to, like, you know, again, that immediate gratification kind of a thing, but you get a certain look to like the lighting that happens in here. Like, you can actually get pretty realistic lighting, but you have to work harder at it. And this is actually, so this is my ATM, NFT ATM. And
that's amazing.
Which again, this is a model talking about your asset library. I made this ATM for an animation that I did for Dis magazine, like 2013 or 2014. So I've had this model, and then you start to have all these things that you can draw from and reuse. And
mine are all titled body parts, all different body parts, because it's all like 3D scans. So like, speaking of Frankenstein's monster, it's just like, here's a whole photo of torsos, you know, like,
I love that.
This is great.
And like the shovel as an asset I had before, the basketball I've used a ton, but then I'll make stuff like I made this rat trap for this one.
Oh, those are handy.
You never know when you're going to need that.
No, I mean, and it's like, that's so, I know it's fun to see your different blend files from different time frames too.
So in some ways I'm regressing, but you know, it's like, it's simpler, it's like more streamlined in some ways though, and I can get ideas out much faster than I used to, and that's like really,
well, that's the most important thing, right? And I think that's the difference between 3D and using software. For me, it's like I never had a vehicle to get my ideas out in the way I needed to, as fast as I needed to. And it's not like I'm fast, but like, it still is like, I mean, I sketch first and then I'll make a piece based on that sketch. And it usually is very different, but it's still never fast enough.
It never comes out just the way that you picture
never,
it. Like, never. I can get really close to my initial vision now. Like once you get really good with this, like, it comes out pretty much how I pictured it now. Sometimes it's like dead on, and that's an amazing feeling, you know?
That is, I mean, the sculpt I'm working on right now is as close to the sketch as I've gotten. I think in the software, it's like what's in my brain combination, and that's really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
But so so, I just want to say, I want to hear a little bit about your, whatever you've got going on right now, any NFTs you want to plug, or like events or shows.
Yeah, we can put the link
Yeah.
in the video comments.
I am working on some stuff that I would like. I think I'm going to drop it through Super Rare. So, because I have been hearing lots of good things through that. That is to be determined, though. But I do have a Super Rare account. I think it's just under Fakeshamus. I actually need to set that up.
Awesome.
And of course, Postmasters is still doing their blockchain thing.
Yeah.
Which, am I getting blocked here? What is this? Yeah, so I should be under here under Fakeshamus probably. If I was staying on brand person,
Maybe.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
So you can find me on there. I don't have any artworks on there yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, this will be
Postmasters is doing their own thing still, and obviously I just had my big show with them, so my studio is mostly empty right now. But I'm working on it, and but there's a lot of work here that probably a lot of people haven't seen, because we reserved, anything that didn't go in the show, they're also offering as NFTs, and there's
smart.
Tons of stuff like that. They're doing it in a really smart way. And there's a whole range of stuff here. So like here's like an NFT version of that Grizzly picture, which we've done print editions, but we're also doing a separate NFT. One of one, basically.
Yeah.
Trying it out. I mean, I don't know how any of it's going to go, but it's we're trying things out. Like
that's awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Well. So I want to say to all of our viewers watching that if they have any suggestions for another artist using 3D, or a curator or writer, to let us know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much, Shamus, for joining us, and thank you, Sophie, the best co-host ever. And we will see everybody in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, happy holidays too. By the time we
happy holidays. Thanks for having me.
Thank
pleasure.
you.